were recently hired by a customer to build this built-in bookshelf. This is for a boy's bedroom. They requested additional storage for all the books and all the toys. And I'm gonna show you exactly how we built this.
Before we get started, here is a short list of all the materials that we're gonna need for this project build. If this is something you're gonna do yourself, take a screenshot of it, write these things down. This is pretty much everything you're gonna need. Taking a look at the measurements that the client wants for this bookshelf, we're looking at about 88 inches high by 30 inches wide, and they want the inside of their shelves to be about 12 inches deep. Unless you have a really large table saw setup, you're gonna have to rip down your material into more manageable pieces. This is pretty common, pretty standard practice. The first cut is gonna be for the back panel. It's gonna be 28.5 inches wide by 88 inches tall. The method by which I'm gonna be cutting down this material is with my Festool TS55 track saw. I'm typically able to get a pretty accurate cut along the length of the board anytime I'm ripping down this material. The track saw does a really good job and the track is pretty accurate, at least within a 1/16 of an inch or a 32nd of an inch. I do have a second track and you can join the two together, but it's a little bit cumbersome and I have found that it's not quite as accurate as me just using one track and moving it down the material and realigning it to my lines and my already cut material. Unfortunately, I don't quite yet have a really good table saw setup where I can run a full sheet of plywood through the table saw and not have to use a circular saw or track saw. If you do, by all means, use your table saw. And if you don't have a track saw like this one, this day and age, there are plenty of affordable options out there that give you really good results. If not, you can always just use a plain old circular saw and a straight edge. And then we're gonna cut it to length. Then we'll move on to the sides. Our side dimensions are gonna be 12 3/4 by 88, and I'm gonna need 2 of those. And then I always check all of my edges and make sure everything is square. Make sure that I'm matched up at 28.5 inches on both ends. And in the off chance that it is a little bit more than that 1/16 of an inch, maybe closer to an 1/8, then I will run it through the table saw and try to get it closer to a similar dimension on both ends. Let's move on to the shelves. I need 3 that are gonna be fixed. 1 at the very top, 1 at the very bottom, and then 1 at the top of our cabinet. These will be butted up against the face frame, so accommodating for our back panel, we'll need them to be 12 inches deep by 28.5 inches wide. Just a little bit of a side note here. I love tools, I love purchasing tools, but the one thing that gives me anxiety and stress is purchasing something that I don't necessarily need, or maybe I don't use as often as I thought I would. I cannot say that about this miter saw. Holy smokes, this miter saw has been a game changer for our business and for the work that we do, and I have used it dozens of times, hundreds of cuts just within the past year. Nothing gives me more satisfaction than putting a tool to use, and it makes me feel like that purchase was worth it. We also did a review of this saw last year this time. Go check that video out once this one's complete. Now to the next shelves. These 2 are gonna be adjustable, and I'm gonna try something that I've never done before, a little bit of a different look, something I saw on Instagram, and I thought, hey, I like how that looks. I'm gonna try it on my next build. Here we go. These next 2 will not be the same depth as what I just did for the fixed shelves. These are gonna be 3/4 of an inch less deep, so 11 1/4 instead of 12. Instead of doing edge banding like I typically do, I want to match the face frames. And so basically I'm just going to add a face frame to these shelves, and you'll see how I do that here shortly. Now we're going to move on to sanding, and we'll start with 80, work our way up to 120. I always mark my material with a pencil just so I have a reference of what material I've taken off, especially with plywood. Because it's plywood, it's very easy to dig into that material and go to the next level, and we don't want that. So if you've never used a pencil while sanding as a reference, give it a try. It will definitely help. So when it comes to pocket hole joinery, that's how we're gonna be joining the sides to this. There's not really like a right or wrong way to put your pocket holes as you go along it, unless you're gonna be interfering with your shelves. In this case, our shelves are not going to be permanent. They're going to be adjustable, except for a couple of places. So what I'm going to do, this is 88 inches wide. For me, the best thing to do is just divide everything in 2. So 44, 22, 11, whatever the difference between 22 and 44 is. And then I'm putting 1.5 inches roughly in for the tops and the bottoms. I'm also going to confirm there is obviously the top and the bottom piece
I'm going to confirm somewhere in here where the top of my, where the doors are going to be at the top. I need to make sure that that's not going to interfere with that shelf, because that shelf will be permanent. There will be pocket holes for that one.
Okay, so I've got to explain what I'm saying here because the audio was bad. Basically, I drew a template on the back based off of all of my measurements, what I wanted to do. Starting at the bottom here, we're working with a 5.5 inch baseboard height. That's a 1x6. I want 1.5 inches between the bottom of the door and the top of that molding. And then we're going to have a 1/2 inch overlay for the doors. That gives us a total of 7.5 inches from the bottom of the floor to the top of that bottom shelf. And then there's the faux doorknobs you can see there. But I kind of guessed as to what I wanted the doors to be. I said 25 inches, so that gives us a 24 inch opening. So those two lines that you see at the bottom and then the top where the tape measure is, that's approximately 24 inches. And then going up here to the top, I want a 1x4 for that top face frame, which is really 3.5 inches. And that's where that measurement is. Going from that point to this next line, which is the top of our bottom shelf, is 52 3/4. The reason I'm taking all these measurements and making all these drawings is because I'm not quite sure how many shelves I need. So starting with all of your fixed points, everything that you know has to be and exactly what you want, you start with that and then you measure what's left over. In this case, I think that only 2 shelves is appropriate. I don't think we're going to need a third. I'll offer a third, but I think 2 is going to be perfectly fine for this space. Moving on to putting this thing together, we're going to attach the sides to the back. I'm going to use pocket hole screws and we'll be drilling into the back panel. This is our Craig pocket hole jig, which we have had since April of 2020. This is another one of those tools that was a great investment. We have used it dozens of times, and we highly recommend using pocket holes at any point you can. They're very structurally sound. All right, now that I've gotten all of my pocket holes drilled, except for this one, I'm not sure about that yet, we're gonna attach the side pieces to this. And so recently I picked up 2 of these clamps off of Amazon. I'm gonna link them in the description box below. It's up to you whether or not you wanna go check them out. I wouldn't give them like a high rating because I'll show you here in 1 second as I get this thing cinched up, and maybe it'll work out this time. Yeah, so these clamps, that section that goes into the pocket hole, whenever you cinch it up, whenever you clamp it, it tends to go forward out of the pocket hole and it like rips the material. You'll see here in just a little bit. Aha! See, look at that. Look at what it did to this freaking, and it's doing it again. Ugh. The good thing is it's the back of the cabinet, so I'm not super concerned about it. It might partially be my fault. That's happened several times. Now the question is, were all of those times my fault too? This is probably a fine piece of equipment. Truth be told, I really have no idea whether or not it's me or a faulty piece of equipment. Check it out for yourself. Link in the description box below. We're gonna move on to attaching the bottom and the top shelf. We'll start with the bottom. And remember when I said the top of that should be about 7.5 inches? That means the underside is 6 3/4. So we're gonna take this speed square and measure from the bottom to the underside of that shelf to give us an exact placement so that it is even on all sides. For the top piece, I'm gonna inset it about 1 inch. That way, if they wanna put something on top like a plant or some type of decor piece, there's at least a small lip so that they're not worried that anything's gonna fall off. Okay, moving on to the face frame for this cabinet. And I've got some leftover primed pine, some 1x3s. We're gonna use that. And I've got to rip those down closer to what a 1x2 would be. So the sides and the top and bottom and then the top of the cabinet shelf, that's all gonna get a 1x2 face frame. Now what I'm gonna do for the adjustable shelves, contrary to what I've done in the past, which was just use edge banding, I'm gonna add a 1x2 face frame for those as well, which is why we had to cut those at a shallower depth. To connect the 1x2s to these shelves, you can use brad nails, 18 gauge, 16 gauge if you want to, and then you can just cover it with wood putty, especially if you're gonna paint it. I've never used biscuit joints for face frames before, especially on shelves, so we're just gonna give it a try. Okay, there's our line, and here comes the plunge cut, and voila, that's how it's done. And then we just do the exact same thing for the face frame. Add a couple biscuits, add a little bit of glue, give it a couple of love taps. When that doesn't work, resort to your clamps, let it dry overnight. That's essentially how you do it, and I'm excited to see it in the shelf. You'll see kind of the full vision here. I think it gives it a little bit of a more elevated look
with the adjustable shelves, because they will be adjustable. That way it matches the face frame, but you can still move them. So now we are going to build the face frames.
What I've done is added a couple of clamps just to give it some pressure so that I can get these vertical pieces right where I want them, and then I can take my measurement for my rails. But doing this also lets me know if there's any shelves that are a bit proud of the side pieces. This one, for example, as you can see, it is sticking out just a little bit too much, so I'm gonna need to trim this one down in order for the face frame to sit flush with the side panel, and also the one that's gonna be here as well. But now what I can do is take the measurements for all of my rails, and now what I'm gonna do is measure this. We've got 26 and 13/16, but I'm gonna go just a little bit beyond that. So I'm making my mark to the right of that 13/16 tick on the tape measure. I'm gonna remove that line, and then I'm just gonna creep up on it. So as I go to fit it inside of my face frame, it's probably not gonna fit perfectly, but then I'm gonna come back and just shave off just enough. That way it's a nice snug fit, not overly tight, but also not loose to where I'm pulling the sides of the face frame in. Again, we're using pocket holes to join our stiles and our rails together. And I started at the bottom. I would recommend starting from the top. I think that would be a little bit easier. Just double checking the fit here, make sure everything is still good. And then we're gonna add the top piece, which again is the 1x4. Another one of those tools that just, it's pretty cool. That's probably my favorite tool. I did have a little bit of a hard time with this next piece, the one that's going to be for the top. I couldn't figure out whether or not it was advantageous to measure from the bottom face frame or the top. The ultimate goal is to make sure it ends up being flush with that corresponding shelf. There's always that chance that both sides are not exactly the same length. So, you make fine-tune adjustments whenever you can. Now it's time to attach the face frame, and this side that you're looking at right now, that's gonna be the side that is visible to everyone coming into the bedroom. That's what you're gonna see. The other side is the wall side. It's gonna be hidden, and we can go about it a couple different ways. We could use brad nails, we can use 16 gauge, which I don't have, or we could use pocket holes again. I did do pocket hole screws on the other side, and I was hoping that I could do pocket holes on the inside of the cabinet, but my drill, the space is just not tall enough. So ultimately I did choose to do pocket holes on this side. And it is a little bit sketchy. I've got, those plugs that you can add. The fact that I'm painting it does make me feel quite a bit better, adding plenty of wood putty and sanding it down nicely. This thing does turn out, and you can't even see where those plugs are in the end.
All right, so the next thing that we've got to tackle is getting these shelves in here. We're going to do adjustable shelving. Instead of fixed shelving, adjustable. I typically use another Craig product. This is the shelf pin hole jig, and this is kind of the main setup here. It comes with this section, also comes with this small drill bit with the flange to keep it from going all the way through your material, and then this pin, which you can kind of go from hole to hole to keep it straight. So basically what I typically do, I start with this hole here. So I'll place it in my cabinet, I'll drill that first hole, and then I'll take this pin and I'll put it right here in that hole, and that sets it up. And then I do all of these and then make my way up. And then in terms of the height, I think it varies from project to project. It's kind of up to your discretion. Obviously you don't want to go way up here, that would be kind of silly. All right, folks, we are ready for paint. We did a little bit of prep work this morning, adding some of this premium wood filler by DAP. I highly recommend this. We're gonna be using our Wagner paint sprayer so that we can knock this out pretty quickly. This is the paint that we're using. The client requested to have the bookshelf match their trim in their home, which their trim is the Water-Base Pro Classic by Sherwin-Williams. What they've got on their doors and their trim, which is what this is going to be next to, is gloss. You don't usually use gloss for cabinets or built-ins unless it's a very specific vibe. Gloss or high gloss is going to show all the imperfections, it's going to show all the mistakes, it's going to show all the scuffs and the marks. And Adrian, our cabinet guy, he recommended satin, which is what we have used and been using, so that's what we're going to use for this project. Let's get to painting.
Before you get started, always make sure to make a mess. That's always helpful. And then you can put on, your protective wear, your face mask and glasses and things like that. The recommendation for coats is about 2, and that's what we ended up doing. Had to wait a few hours in between. And then the next morning, I didn't film this, but Sasha was there and she helped me sand this thing down to get it really nice and smooth. About 400 grit, 600 grit, 1,000, somewhere in that ballpark. Looking for all of the imperfections and raised grain or paint that just felt globby. Getting all that sanded down so it has a nice smooth finish is very important. Now we are at the client's house ready to install this cabinet, and the first thing we've got to do is remove the baseboards. And so I'm instructing Sasha here to look for the studs with this crowbar. That will give us plenty of leverage to be able to remove these baseboards without actually damaging the drywall. The method by which we find studs to attach to is fourfold. Number 1, confirm with the client that there's no plumbing that they are aware of behind a particular wall. Step 2, confirm that knowledge by knocking on the walls, checking the bedrooms. Step 3 is to use your given stud finder. And then step 4, I always verify any studs that I might have found with the stud finder with a magnet or the stud buddy. Find the drywall screws that are consistent all the way up the wall. Whenever we're installing stuff like this and we don't know what's behind the wall, start with the least amount of screws to tack into the wall as you possibly can. If you can get away with just putting 2 screws and that's enough to structurally hold this, just do that. He's right. The times where I've had boo-boos is when I've added way too many screws when they just weren't necessary. We're gonna add 2 for this bookshelf, and that's gonna be just enough. Sasha is now measuring for where our screws are gonna go. We're only gonna do 2 for the time being and see what that gets us. 1 at the top and then 1 underneath the shelf where the doors are gonna go. So it's level as we could do it. We had to shim in that top left corner in order for it to be plumb up and down. Kind of a sizable gap over here on the left side that we're gonna have to deal with. Figure that out. Are you too short?
I'm not as accurate in this, but there's a mark.
Measure from the wall to your stud location, and then for where you're gonna put that hole in the bookshelf, just subtract the thickness of your material for that side panel, and that'll get you right where you need to be. The remainder of the time consisted of Sasha doing touch-ups and just where there were any inconsistencies in the wood grain. There were a couple spots on the side that needed a little bit more wood filler, sand that down and paint over it. Just paint touch-ups, and then I added the baseboards to the bottom. On this trip, the doors weren't quite ready, so I did have to come back another day to install the doors. These hinges are very easy to install. I don't ever use a jig, you just eyeball it. And I also use the back side of the hinge, butt it up against the edge of the door, and that really helps kind of line this up, but it's very easy to just do it by eye. And kind of the same thing for attaching the doors to the face frame. I don't use a jig, I eyeball it. I know that it's about a 1/2 inch overlay, and so I eyeball what a 1/2 inch is, or I'll measure it, you can always do that. And then you add that first screw to give you some support, and then you can kind of adjust as needed, whether you need to go up or down. Try to get it as close as possible, and that'll definitely help, but any fine-tune adjustments that need to be made are very simple. And this right here, ladies and gentlemen, is what I like to classify as a mistake. And here's what I did. So I gave him the rough opening measurements of the Carcass without the face frame on there. What I should have done is waited until I put the face frame on and then measured that rough opening. So I was off about 1.5 inches all the way around, somewhere in that ballpark. I knew things looked a little funny. Adrian was able to cook up a couple of more doors pretty quickly. And in the meantime, I'm gonna add this filler strip to that corner where the gap is. This is about 1/4 inch in thickness and about 3/4 inch in width. Back the very next day to redo these doors, and they fit perfectly. The lesson here is kind of obvious. Yeah, make sure you give the right measurements after your full build is complete, but beyond that, be easy on yourself. You're gonna make mistakes. Allow yourself to make mistakes, especially the small ones, and give yourself grace. That way when the big mistakes happen, they're not as severe. The final touch is adding the door handles, and these are the ones that match their downstairs kitchen door handles. I did not bring my jig, but you don't really need one. I always use a drill bit that is slightly larger than the screw. That way there's a little bit of play, and if something needs to adjust one way or the other, it's very simple to do. What a beautiful built-in bookcase. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, but don't go anywhere just yet. Check out this next video. I think you'll like it.